Ambassador Zethkari stood in the Great Hall of the Galactic Federation Council. His 4 arms were shaking with anger. The silver skin on his tall body was turning red. He looked at the big screen showing his new job assignment. Earth, a small planet far away from the center of the galaxy. The people there had just learned how to travel between stars. They were still very young as a space-traveling race. "This is wrong," Zethkari said through his voice translator. His words came out sharp and angry. "I have worked for the Federation for 30 years. I have stopped wars between planets. I have made trade deals that saved millions of lives, and now you want me to babysit cave dwellers?" The High Council leader, Vexen, did not change his expression. His people, the Altarians, were known for being calm and serious. "The humans have built their first faster-than-light ships, Ambassador. The Federation rules say we must have a diplomat there. Your ship leaves tomorrow." Zethkari's people, the Valaxians, believed in logic and control. They did not like showing emotions. But right now, Zethkari was finding it very hard to stay calm. He had read the files about humans. They were messy, violent, and driven by feelings instead of smart thinking. They had spent most of their history fighting each other over land, resources, and strange ideas they called religions. "Council leader," Zethkari said, trying to keep his voice steady, "I have successfully dealt with the warrior clans of Sigma. Prime, I have negotiated with the machine minds of the Cyber Collective. These humans are different. They are primitive. They still use chemical weapons. They still have poverty and hunger on their own planet. How can such a species be ready for galactic contact?" Vexen's eyes glowed slightly brighter. This was a sign of mild annoyance in his species. "The humans have surprised us before, Ambassador. They went from first-powered flight to faster-than-light travel in less than 150 years. That is faster than any species in Federation history." "Speed does not equal wisdom," Zethkari replied. "Their files show constant warfare. They have weapons that can destroy their entire planet. They fight over things that do not matter. They let their emotions control their decisions." "Which is exactly why we need our best diplomat there," Vexen said firmly. "Your job is to guide them. Help them understand galactic law and customs. Make sure they do not cause problems for other species." Zethkari felt his anger growing stronger. This was supposed to be punishment, he was sure of it. Last year, he had spoken against the Council's decision to allow the Zephyrian Empire to expand into 3 new star systems. He had been right. Of course, Zephyrians had caused nothing but trouble since then, but the Council did not like being told they were wrong. "I request a different assignment," Zethkari said. "The Andromedan peace talks are starting next month. The Crystalline Confederacy needs a new trade negotiator. There are many important jobs that need an experienced diplomat." "The decision is final," Vexen said. "You will go to Earth. You will establish formal diplomatic relations. You will report back to us every 30 days. This assignment is not optional." Zethkari's skin turned a darker shade of red. In his culture, this was a sign of deep shame and anger. "How long will I be stuck on this backward planet?" "As long as necessary," Vexen replied. "The humans are unpredictable. They may need years of guidance before they are ready for full Federation membership, or they may prove unworthy of membership entirely. That will be for you to determine." The meeting ended badly. Zethkari left the council chamber feeling bitter and angry. He had worked so hard to build his reputation. Now he was being sent to the edge of nowhere to deal with a species that had barely figured out how to leave their own solar system. The trip to Earth took 3 weeks. Zethkari spent the time reading every file the Federation had about humans. The more he read, the more disgusted he became. These creatures seemed to have no sense of logic or order. They fought wars over which invisible god was real. They destroyed their own environment for short-term profit. They had different skin colors and somehow managed to hate each other because of it. One file particularly bothered him. It was about something called the World Wars. Humans had fought two massive conflicts that killed millions of their own people. The reasons for these wars seemed completely stupid to Zethkari. They fought over land, resources, and political ideas. Any logical species would have simply divided resources equally and moved on. But the most confusing thing about humans was their art. They created music, paintings, stories, and sculptures that served no practical purpose. They spent time and resources on these things instead of focusing on survival and progress. Zethkari could not understand why an intelligent species would waste energy on such useless activities. His ship, the diplomatic vessel Harmony, finally reached Earth's solar system. Immediately, 3 human ships appeared on his screens. They were small and primitive-looking, but they moved with surprising speed and coordination. The lead ship sent a message. "Unknown vessel, this is Captain Jake Morrison of the Earth Defense Force. Please identify yourself and state your business in this system." Zethkari was surprised by the professional tone. He had expected the humans to be either terrified or aggressive. Instead, they sounded calm and businesslike. "This is Ambassador Zethkari of the Galactic Federation," he replied. "I am here on official diplomatic business." There was a pause. Then Captain Morrison's voice came back, and Zethkari could hear excitement in it. "Ambassador, we have been expecting you. We are honored by your visit. Please follow our ships to Luna Station. We have prepared a welcome ceremony." "A welcome ceremony," Zethkari sighed. He would have to pretend to be interested in primitive human customs. This assignment was going to be even worse than he thought. Luna Station was bigger than Zethkari had expected. The humans had built a large orbital platform around their moon. It was not as advanced as Federation stations, but it was solid and functional. The docking bay was clean and well organized. Perhaps these humans were not completely hopeless. A small group of humans waited for him as he left his ship. The leader was a woman with gray hair and kind eyes. She wore a simple uniform with no decorations. Behind her stood a tall man in a military uniform and a younger man with thick glasses. "Ambassador Zethkari," the woman said, stepping forward. "I am Dr. Linda Carter, Earth's lead scientist for alien contact. This is General Paul Martinez and Dr. Kevin Brooks. We are very happy to meet you." She held out her hand toward him. Zethkari knew this was a human greeting custom. He touched her hand briefly with one of his forearms, trying not to show his disgust at the physical contact. "I am here because the Federation requires it," he said coldly, nothing more. Dr. Carter's smile did not fade. "Of course, Ambassador. We understand this is official business, but we hope you will find your time here pleasant as well." "Pleasant?" Zethkari almost laughed. There was nothing pleasant about being sent to babysit a species that was barely out of the Stone Age. But he was a professional diplomat. He would do his job, file his reports, and hopefully get transferred to somewhere important as soon as possible. "Show me to my quarters," he said. "I want to begin the formal diplomatic process immediately." As they walked through the station, Zethkari noticed something strange. The humans they passed in the corridors looked at him with curiosity, not fear. Some even smiled and nodded. Did they not understand that he was a member of a species far more advanced than theirs? Did they not realize they should be intimidated? This was going to be a very long assignment. The shuttle ride down to Earth's surface made Zethkari feel sick. Not from the movement, but from what he could see through the windows. The planet was covered in lights that made no sense. Cities spread out in messy patterns with no logical design. Roads twisted and curved instead of going straight. Everything looked chaotic and unplanned. Dr. Carter sat across from him in the shuttle, still smiling that strange human smile. "You'll be staying in New Geneva," she said. "It's our new capital city. We built it specifically for diplomatic meetings with other species." Zethkari looked down at the approaching city. It was slightly better organized than the others he had seen, but still primitive. The buildings were made of metal and glass instead of the living crystal his people used. Everything looked cold and lifeless. "How many people live in this city?" he asked. "About 2 million, Dr. Carter replied. "We kept it smaller than our other major cities." We thought it would be less overwhelming for alien visitors. 2 million people crammed into such a small space. Zethkari's home city on Valaxia housed 50 million beings, but it was spread across a much larger area. The buildings grew naturally from the ground, shaped by careful thought and planning. These human structures looked like they had been thrown together quickly. The shuttle landed on a platform near the center of the city. As they walked toward the main building, Zethkari was hit by a wave of noise. Humans were everywhere, talking loudly, moving in all directions, making sounds that his translator could barely keep up with. The smell of cooking food and vehicle exhaust filled the air. "Is it always this noisy?" he asked. Dr. Carter laughed. "This is actually pretty quiet for a human city. You should see New York or Tokyo." They entered a tall building that the humans called the Diplomatic Center. The inside was cleaner and quieter than the streets, but still felt wrong to Zethkari. The decorations were bright and colorful instead of the calm, neutral tones his people preferred. Pictures of human faces hung on the walls, showing far too much emotion. President Allen Hughes was waiting for them in a large room filled with chairs arranged in a circle. He was a tall man with silver hair and wrinkles around his eyes that came from smiling too much. He stood up when they entered and walked over with his hand extended. "Ambassador Zethkari," he said warmly, "welcome to Earth. I hope your journey was comfortable." Zethkari barely touched the man's hand. It was adequate. "I would like to begin the formal diplomatic process immediately." "Of course," President Hughes said. "But first, let me show you to your quarters. You must be tired from your long trip." The rooms they had prepared for him were larger than he had expected. The humans had obviously tried to research his species' needs. The temperature was correct, and they had provided the right kind of lighting, but everything was still wrong. The furniture was made for humans, not for someone with 4 arms and a different body shape. "We tried to make it comfortable for you," Dr. Carter said, watching him examine the room. "If you need anything changed, just let us know." "It will suffice," Zethkari said coldly. The next morning, the real diplomatic meetings began. Zethkari had prepared a standard first contact presentation. He would explain the Federation's rules, tell the humans what they needed to do, and set up a basic trade agreement. It should have taken a few hours at most. Instead, it took all day. The humans asked questions about everything. Not just simple questions, but detailed ones that showed they had been thinking deeply about galactic politics. "Ambassador, President," Hughes said during the morning session, "these Federation protocols require all our spaceships to carry special identification beacons. What happens if these beacons are detected by hostile forces?" Zethkari was annoyed by the question. "The beacons are for identification purposes only. They are required by Federation law. But what if someone uses them to track our ships?" "General?" Martinez asked. He was a short, sturdy man with scars on his hands. "What if pirates or enemy forces use these beacons to find us?" "That is not a concern," Zethkari replied. "The Federation has used this system for thousands of years." Dr. Brooks, the scientist with thick glasses, leaned forward. "Have there ever been cases where the beacon system was compromised? Have criminal organizations ever used them for illegal purposes?" Zethkari's skin began to turn orange, a sign of irritation in his species. "These protocols are not open for discussion. They are requirements for all Federation members." The humans looked at each other. Dr. Carter spoke up. "Ambassador, we're not trying to be difficult. We just want to understand the system better. Could we perhaps modify the beacon design to include some security features?" "The beacons cannot be modified," Zethkari said firmly. "They must meet exact Federation specifications. What about a compromise?" President Hughes suggested, "We could use the standard beacons for trade ships, but allow military vessels to use modified versions for security purposes." This was getting ridiculous. Zethkari had negotiated with dozens of species, and none of them had questioned the basic Federation protocols. Most species were grateful just to be considered for membership. "These protocols have been established for millennia," he said, his voice getting colder. They are not subject to debate by a species that has barely achieved faster than light. Travel. General Martinez's face got slightly red. Ambassador, we may be new to space travel, but we're not stupid. We're just trying to protect our people. Your people will be protected by Federation law, Zethkari replied. Once you are members, any attack on your ships will be considered an attack on the Federation itself. And how long does it take for Federation forces to respond to an attack? Dr. Brooks asked. If we're on the edge of Federation space, how quickly can help arrive? Zethkari paused. In truth, Federation response times to remote systems were often measured in weeks or months. But he was not going to admit that to these primitive humans. Federation protection is guaranteed, he said instead. The questions continued all afternoon. The humans wanted to know about trade routes, about other species, about Federation history. They asked about things that no new species had ever cared about before. Most civilizations were simply happy to gain access to advanced technology and protection, but the most frustrating part was how they treated him. Instead of showing proper respect for his superior knowledge and experience, they treated him like an equal. They disagreed with him politely. They asked him to explain his reasoning. They even offered their own suggestions for improving Federation systems. With respect, Ambassador, Dr. Carter said during the evening session, the Federation's approach to new species seems somewhat rigid. Have you considered that different species might have different needs? The Federation has successfully integrated over 2,000 species, Zethkari replied. Our methods are proven. But were all those species at the same level of development when they joined? President Hughes asked. Some might have been more advanced than others, right? Zethkari had to admit this was true. Some species had been more advanced than others when they joined the Federation, but that was not relevant to the current situation. Humans are clearly in the early stages of technological development, he said. You require guidance and structure. We're willing to learn, Dr. Brooks said. But we'd like to understand why certain rules exist. For example, why do Federation ships have to avoid certain star systems? What makes those systems dangerous? Another question that showed these humans had been studying Federation data more carefully than he had expected. The restricted systems contained dangerous phenomena or hostile species. But explaining that would require admitting that the Federation was not all-powerful. Some areas of space are restricted for safety reasons, he said vaguely. What kind of safety reasons? General Martinez pressed. Are we talking about natural hazards like black holes and radiation, or are there hostile species we should know about? Zethkari felt his patience wearing thin. The Federation will provide all necessary information when you become members. But how can we decide whether to become members if we don't know what we're getting into? Dr. Carter asked reasonably. The logic of her question was sound, which made it even more annoying. Zethkari was used to dealing with species that either desperately wanted Federation membership or were forced to accept it after military conquest. These humans were treating membership like a business deal they could walk away from. As the day ended, Zethkari felt exhausted in a way he had never experienced before. The humans had not been rude or aggressive. They had been polite and professional throughout the entire meeting. But their endless questions and suggestions had worn him down. We'll continue tomorrow, President Hughes said as they prepared to leave. Thank you for your patience with our questions, Ambassador. Patience. Zethkari almost laughed. These humans had no idea how much patience they were testing. As he returned to his quarters, he began composing his first report to the Federation Council. He would recommend that Earth be denied membership. These humans were clearly not ready for galactic civilization, but as he tried to write the report, he found himself thinking about some of their questions. They had not been stupid questions. In fact, some of them had been quite intelligent. The humans had identified real problems with Federation systems that no one had ever bothered. 3 months had passed since Zethkari arrived on Earth. He had spent most of his time in formal meetings, trying to explain Federation rules to humans who asked too many questions. But today was different. Dr. Carter had invited him to visit other parts of Earth to see how humans lived outside of government buildings. You need to understand our culture better, she had said. You can't judge a species by only meeting politicians and scientists. Zethkari did not want to waste time on tourism, but the Federation Council had ordered him to learn about human society. So he found himself sitting in a flying vehicle called a transport plane, heading to a place Dr. Carter called the farming regions. Through the window, he could see vast areas of green plants growing in neat rows. What is the purpose of organizing food production this way? He asked Dr. Brooks, who had come along to explain human agriculture. Each farmer owns their own land, Dr. Brooks explained, adjusting his thick glasses. They grow food not just for themselves, but to sell to others. It's been working pretty well for thousands of years. Inefficient, Zethkari observed. Central authority could organize food production much better. Eliminate waste, distribute resources equally. Dr. Brooks smiled. We tried that in some places. It didn't work out so well. People seem to work harder when they're working for themselves and their families. The transport plane landed near a small town surrounded by farms. As they walked through the streets, Zethkari noticed something strange. The humans here looked different from the ones in New Geneva. Their skin was darker from working in the sun. Their clothes were simpler. But they seemed happy. Children ran through the streets, playing games and laughing loudly. Adults sat on porches talking to each other. Elderly humans worked in gardens, moving slowly but with obvious satisfaction. It was all very primitive, but there was something about it that Zethkari could not identify. Then the emergency alert came through Dr. Carter's communication device. A massive earthquake had struck the region just 200 kilometers away. The ground shaking had destroyed buildings, roads, and farms. Many people were trapped or injured. We need to go help, Dr. Carter said immediately. Help? Zethkari was confused. This area is not your responsibility. You live in New Geneva. These are our people, Dr. Brooks said, already heading back to the transport plane. When humans are in trouble, other humans help. That's just how we work. The flight to the earthquake zone took only 30 minutes, but it felt much longer. When they arrived, Zethkari saw destruction unlike anything he had witnessed before. Buildings had collapsed into piles of broken stone and metal. Roads had cracked open, creating deep cuts in the ground. Smoke rose from fires that were burning out of control, but the most amazing thing was not the destruction. It was the response to it. Humans were everywhere, digging through rubble with their bare hands. They were pulling injured people from collapsed buildings. They were sharing food and water with strangers. They were setting up temporary shelters for families who had lost their homes. How did they all get here so fast? Zethkari asked, watching hundreds of humans working together. They came from all over the planet, Dr. Carter replied, putting on work gloves. As soon as the news went out, people started traveling here to help. What do they gain from this? What payment do they receive? Dr. Carter looked at him strangely. Payment? They don't get paid. They're volunteers. Volunteers? People who help without being forced to. People who help because it's the right thing to do. Zethkari watched in amazement as the rescue work continued. A group of young humans had formed a chain, passing pieces of broken concrete from hand to hand to clear a path to trapped survivors. Older humans were cooking food in large pots and giving it away for free. Medical workers were treating injuries without asking whether the patients could pay for treatment. This makes no logical sense, he told Dr. Brooks. These people will never return to this region? They will never see these earthquake victims again? They are using their own time, money, and energy to help strangers. What do they gain? Dr. Brooks was helping to carry an injured elderly woman to a medical tent. He paused to wipe sweat from his forehead. Look at their faces, Ambassador. Look at how they feel when they help someone. Zethkari looked more carefully at the rescue. Workers, their faces were dirty and tired, but there was something else there. Something his translator could not put into words. They looked satisfied. Happy, even. As if helping others made them feel good about themselves. One rescue worker, a young woman with short red hair, had just pulled a small child from a collapsed house. The child was crying and scared, but unhurt. The woman held the child close, speaking softly until the crying stopped. When the child's parents arrived and took their son back, the woman smiled in a way that made her whole face light up. "She looks like she just won a great victory," Sethkari observed. "In a way, she did," Dr. Brooks replied. "She saved a life. For humans, there's no greater victory than that." The next strange incident happened 2 weeks later during a visit to Luna Station. A group of human children had been invited to meet the alien ambassador as part of something called a cultural exchange program. Sethkari had agreed to the meeting reluctantly, expecting it to be brief and formal. Instead, he found himself surrounded by 8 children between the ages of 6 and 10. They showed no fear of his strange appearance. Instead, they looked at him with bright, curious eyes and asked questions that adults would never dare to ask. "Do you have a family?" asked a small girl with blonde hair and blue eyes. Her name was Emma Collins. "Valaxians do not have families as humans understand them," Sethkari replied carefully. "We are created through biological synthesis in carefully controlled environments." Emma's face scrunched up in confusion. "So you don't have a mom and dad?" "No, that sounds lonely," she said simply. "Do you ever wish you had parents like we do?" The question hit Sethkari like a physical blow. No one had ever asked him such a thing before. In Valaxian society, their reproduction method was considered superior because it eliminated the emotional complications of family relationships. Children were raised by the state according to logical principles, not by emotional parents who might make mistakes. But as Emma asked her innocent question, Sethkari found himself wondering what it would have been like to have someone who cared about him just because he existed. Someone who would worry about him, be proud of his achievements, comfort him when he failed. "I have never considered that question," he admitted. "My mom says everyone needs someone to love them," Emma said seriously. "Even aliens from space." A boy named Marcus Brown raised his hand like he was in school. "Do you have friends on your planet?" "Valaxians have colleagues and professional associates," Sethkari replied. "But do you have friends? People you hang out with just for fun?" Fun, another concept that Valaxians considered inefficient. Sethkari tried to explain that his people focused on important work, not on recreational activities. But the children looked at him with such sadness that he stopped talking. "That sounds really boring," said a girl named Sophie Martinez. "Don't you ever just want to play games or watch movies or eat ice cream?" "Ice cream serves no nutritional purpose," Sethkari sighed. "It is simply frozen sugar and fat, but it tastes good," Sophie exclaimed. "And it makes you happy. That's the whole point." After the children left, Sethkari found himself alone in Luna Station's observation deck, looking down at Earth. The planet looked beautiful from space, with its blue oceans and white clouds. But more than that, it looked alive in a way that his own world did not. Dr. Carter joined him a few minutes later, carrying 2 cups of the hot drink called coffee that Sethkari had learned to enjoy. "The children's questions bothered you," she observed, handing him a cup. "Human children are unusual," Sethkari admitted. "That girl, Emma, showed concern for my emotional well-being despite having just met me. This is not logical behavior." "Maybe not," Dr. Carter said with a smile, "but it's human behavior. We care about others, even strangers, especially children. They haven't learned yet that caring is supposed to be complicated." "Your species is inefficient," Sethkari said, but his voice lacked its usual criticism. "You waste resources on emotional responses that serve no logical purpose." "Maybe we do," Dr. Carter replied, sipping her coffee. "But we're happy, and happiness isn't logical. It's just important." Sethkari thought about this conversation for days afterward. On his home planet, efficiency was the highest value. Everything was organized to produce the best results with the least waste. But the humans seemed to value something different. They valued how things made them feel, not just how well they worked. Late that night, he tried to write his monthly report to the Federation Council. He was supposed to recommend whether humans were ready for Federation membership. But every time he tried to write that they were too primitive, he thought about the earthquake rescue workers. Every time he tried to write that they were too emotional, he thought about little Emma's concern for his loneliness. These humans were different from any species he had encountered before. They were not driven by pure logic like his own people. They were not focused only on power like the warrior races. They were not obsessed with technology like the machine civilizations. Zethkari was in his office on Luna Station when the alarm started blaring. The sound was loud and urgent, making his translator work overtime to figure out what the humans were shouting. Red lights flashed in the corridors as people ran past. His door, Dr. Carter burst into his office without knocking. Her face was pale and worried. "Ambassador, we have a problem. 3 unknown ships just appeared at the edge of our solar system. They're heading straight for us." "Unknown ships?" Zethkari followed her to the command center. "What type of vessels?" "We're not sure, but they're big, much bigger than anything we have." Dr. Carter's hands were shaking as she spoke. "They're not responding to our communication attempts." The command center was full of humans working frantically at their computers. Captain Morrison stood in the middle of it all, giving orders in a calm voice that did not match the panic on his face. When he saw Zethkari, he walked over quickly. "Ambassador, do you recognize these ship designs?" Captain Morrison showed him a screen displaying the approaching vessels. Ikari felt his stomach drop. The ships were dark and angular, with weapon ports covering their hulls. He knew those designs very well. "Those are Krek Syndicate battle cruisers," he said quietly. "Krek Syndicate?" Dr. Carter asked. "Pirates," Zethkari explained. "They are criminals who attack weak targets for profit. They steal cargo, take prisoners to sell as slaves, and destroy anything they cannot use." Captain Morrison's jaw tightened. "How dangerous are they?" "Very dangerous. Each of those ships has more firepower than your entire space fleet. They have advanced shields, faster than light weapons, and experienced crews who have been fighting for decades." The command center fell silent except for the beeping of computers and the distant sound of alarms. Zethkari could see the fear in the humans' eyes. They had just learned to travel between stars, and now they faced an enemy that could easily destroy them. "We should evacuate the station," General Martinez said, entering the command center. "Get everyone to the surface of the moon where they'll be safer." "There's not enough time," Captain Morrison replied, looking at his screens. Those ships will be here in 30 minutes. We can't evacuate 2,000 people that quickly." "Then we fight," Dr. Brooks said. Zethkari was surprised to see the quiet scientist standing with the military officers. "We can't just let them take our station. Fight?" Zethkari stared at them in disbelief. "You cannot fight the Krek Syndicate. Your ships are too small. Your weapons too weak. This is not a battle you can win." Captain Morrison looked at him steadily. "Maybe not. But we're not going to run away and let them hurt our people." "Your people will die if you fight," Zethkari said. "The logical choice is to surrender. Offer them whatever they want. Perhaps they will take your cargo and leave without killing anyone." "The Kreks don't just take cargo," General Martinez said grimly. "They take people too, to sell as slaves." "Would you want us to hand over innocent families to save ourselves?" Zethkari had no answer for that. In his culture, survival was the highest priority. Individual sacrifice for the group was logical, but the group's survival always came first. But these humans seemed to think differently. "Begin evacuation procedures anyway," Captain Morrison ordered. "Get the children and elderly to the moon's surface first. Everyone else stays to help defend the station." "I'll stay too, Dr. Carter." "Saad and me," Dr. Brooks added. One by one, the civilians in the command center volunteered to stay and help. They were scientists, engineers, teachers, and doctors. None of them were soldiers, but all of them were willing to risk their lives to protect others. Zethkari watched in amazement as the evacuation began. Parents said goodbye to their children, sending them to safety while staying behind to fight. Elderly humans helped carry supplies to the defense positions. Even the children who were being evacuated asked if they could stay and help. "This is madness," Zethkari told Dr. Carter as she worked at her computer, trying to boost the station's shields. These people are not soldiers. They should save themselves. They are protecting their families, she replied without looking up. This is what humans do. We protect the people we love. The Krex ships arrived exactly when predicted. They were massive, dark shapes that blocked out the stars behind them. Their weapons began charging immediately, energy building up in the weapon ports along their hulls. "Attention, human station," a voice came through the communication system. It was rough and threatening. "This is Commander Vex of the Krex Syndicate. Surrender immediately and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in the destruction of your station." Captain Morrison picked up the communication device. "This is Captain Morrison of Luna Station. We will not surrender. Leave our system immediately or we will defend ourselves." Harsh laughter came through the speakers. "Defend yourselves? With what? Your tiny ships and primitive weapons? This will be amusing." The battle began 3 minutes later. The human ships were small and fast compared to the massive Krex cruisers, but they were completely outgunned. Captain Morrison led 5 Earth defense, 4 ships against the 3 enemy vessels. What happened next amazed Zethkari more than anything else he had seen since arriving on Earth. Instead of attacking the Krex ships directly, the human vessels began a complex dance through the asteroid belt that surrounded Luna Station. They used the floating rocks as cover, darting between them like small fish avoiding large predators. "What are they doing?" Zethkari asked. "Using the environment too." "Their advantage," General Martinez replied, watching the tactical display. "The Krex ships are too big to follow them into the asteroid field safely." The human ships fired their weapons not at the enemy vessels, but at the asteroids themselves. Large rocks broke apart into thousands of smaller pieces, creating a cloud of debris that interfered with the Krex sensors and weapons. Meanwhile, Dr. Brooks was working frantically at his computer. "I'm into their communication system," he announced. "Uploading the virus now." "Virus?" Zethkari asked. "A computer program designed to disrupt their targeting systems," Dr. Carter explained. "Kevin's been working on it since we first detected their ships." On the screens, Zethkari could see the Krex ships beginning to have problems. Their weapon systems were firing randomly, missing the human ships by large distances. Their movements became erratic as their navigation computers struggled with the interference. But the humans were not finished. Dr. Carter had been modifying the station's communication array, turning it into a massive jamming device. The Krex ships began firing at each other, their computers confused by the false signals. "Impossible," Commander Vex's voice came through the speakers, sounding angry and frustrated. "How are these primitives doing this?" The battle lasted 6 hours. The humans lost 2 ships and suffered heavy damage to Luna Station, but they had achieved something incredible. The Krex pirates, who had expected an easy victory, found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to behave logically. Finally, Commander Vex had enough. "This system is more trouble than it's worth." His voice came through the communication system, filled with disgust. "All ships, withdraw immediately." The 3 Krex cruisers jumped back into faster-than-light travel, disappearing from the sensors. The humans had won. The command center erupted in cheers. People hugged each other, cried with relief, and celebrated their impossible victory. Zethkari stood in the middle of it all, trying to understand what he had just witnessed. Captain Morrison, his uniform torn and his face covered with sweat, walked over to the ambassador. "Ambassador, we need to know. Will the Federation consider this an act of war? Are we going to face retaliation for defending ourselves?" Zethkari looked at the captain, seeing him clearly for the first time. This was not a primitive savage, but a leader who had just won a brilliant defensive battle while putting the lives of his people above his own safety. "The Federation will consider this an act of self-defense," Zethkari said slowly, "and I will recommend that Earth be granted full membership status immediately." Captain Morrison smiled tiredly. "Thank you, Ambassador." As the celebration continued, around him, Zethkari began to understand something important about humans. They were not just chaotic and emotional. They were creative, determined, and willing to sacrifice for others. They had faced a superior enemy and won through intelligence, cooperation, and sheer refusal to give up. For the first time since arriving on Earth, Zethkari felt something that might have been respect. These humans were not primitive. They were something far more dangerous and impressive. They were survivors. The weeks after the battle with the Krex pirates changed everything for Zethkari. He found himself thinking differently about humans and about his mission on Earth. The official reports he sent to the Federation Council began to sound very different. From his first angry messages, Dr. Carter had convinced him to visit more human communities to see how they lived when there was no crisis to face. "You've seen us in meetings and in battle," she said, "but you haven't seen us just being human." So Zethkari found himself in a small farming town in a place called Kansas. The town had only 3,000 people, surrounded by endless fields of growing food. The humans here lived simple lives, far from the politics and technology of the big cities. He stayed with a family named the Johnsons. Frank Johnson was an elderly man who had spent his whole life growing corn and wheat. His wife Mary was a retired teacher who now spent her time taking care of her garden and reading books. They had welcomed Zethkari into their home without fear or hesitation. "Never thought I'd have an alien staying in my guest room," Frank said with a laugh as he showed Zethkari around the farm. "But I guess there's a first time for everything." On the second day of his visit, a powerful storm struck the area. The wind was so strong it knocked down trees and power lines. When the storm passed, Frank's barn had been completely destroyed. 50 years of tools, equipment, and stored grain were scattered across the fields. Zethkari expected the old farmer to be devastated. Instead, Frank just looked at the wreckage and sighed. "Well, I guess we'll have to build a new one." "How will you pay for a new barn?" Zethkari asked. "Do you have insurance for this type of damage?" "Some," Frank replied, "but not enough to cover everything. I suppose we'll figure something out." The next morning, Zethkari woke up to the sound of vehicles arriving. He looked out the window and saw trucks, cars, and even tractors pulling up to the Johnson farm. Dozens of humans were getting out, carrying tools and building materials. "What is happening?" he asked Mary, who was making breakfast for what looked like an army of people. "The neighbors are here to help rebuild the barn," she said simply. Word got around about what happened, and folks decided to pitch in. Zethkari watched in amazement as the humans worked together. They had organized themselves without any central authority. Some people brought lumber and nails. Others brought food and drinks for the workers. Children carried tools and cleaned up debris. Even elderly people helped by cooking meals and keeping track of supplies. "How do they know what to do?" "Zethkari?" asked Frank, who was directing the construction with obvious skill. "Most of us have built barns before," Frank replied, wiping sweat from his forehead. "And those who haven't are willing to learn. That's how it works around here." "But why are they helping you? What do they gain from this?" Frank stopped working and looked at Zethkari with surprise. "They're our neighbors. When someone needs help, you help them. That's just what people do. But you said you cannot pay them." "Pay them?" Frank laughed. "Ambassador, money's got nothing to do with it. When my neighbor's house burned down 3 years ago, I helped him rebuild. When the Miller family lost their crops to drought, everyone pitched in to help them through the winter. It all evens out in the end." The barn was finished in 3 days. When it was done, the humans had a big party with music, food, and dancing. Children ran around playing games while adults sat and talked. Everyone seemed genuinely happy to be there. Zethkari found himself talking to a young woman named Rachel Wilson, who had driven 4 hours to help with the construction. "You don't even know the Johnson family personally," he observed. "Why? Did you come all this way to help them?" Rachel smiled. "My grandfather always said that helping others is like putting money in the bank. Someday you'll need help too, and it'll be there waiting for you. But really, it just feels good to help people." That phrase kept echoing in Zethkari's mind. It feels good to help people. He had heard similar things from humans before, but he was starting to understand what they meant. These people actually enjoyed helping others even when there was No logical benefit to them. A few weeks later, Zethkari was back on Luna Station when another emergency occurred. A mining accident on Mars had trapped 17 workers deep underground. The rescue operation would be dangerous and expensive, with no guarantee of success, but once again, humans from across the solar system volunteered to help. Dr. Carter led a team of medical specialists to Mars. Engineers and rescue experts dropped everything to join the effort. Even ordinary citizens sent money and supplies to support the rescue mission. "Why do you do this?" Zethkari asked Dr. Carter as they waited for news from the rescue site. She had been working for 72 hours straight, barely stopping to eat or sleep. "Because they're trapped and scared, and we can help them," she replied, her eyes red with exhaustion. "What other reason do we need? These are not your family members? You gain nothing from this effort except fatigue and risk?" Dr. Carter looked at him with the same expression Frank Johnson had used. "Ambassador, if you have to ask why we help people in trouble, then I really can't explain it in a way you'd understand." But Zethkari was beginning to understand. Humans had something his species had lost somewhere in their evolution toward perfect logic. They had the ability to care about others simply because those others existed and needed help. The breakthrough in his understanding came during a cultural festival in New Geneva. The humans had organized a celebration showing music, art, and traditions from all over their planet. Zethkari attended reluctantly, expecting to be bored by primitive entertainment. Instead, he found himself fascinated by a performance of human music. The orchestra combined instruments from different human cultures, creating sounds that were complex and beautiful. As the music played, Zethkari felt something he had never experienced before. The sounds seemed to create emotions inside him that had no logical purpose. During the intermission, a 10-year-old boy named Marcus Brown came up to him. "Did you like the music?" he asked with bright, curious eyes. "It was interesting," Zethkari admitted. "I do not understand its purpose, but it created unusual responses in my mind." Marcus smiled. "My dad is the conductor. He says music is how we share feelings with each other, even when we don't speak the same language. Share feelings." That was exactly what had happened. The music had somehow transmitted the emotions of the human musicians directly into Zethkari's consciousness. It was completely illogical, but it was also wonderful. After the festival, Zethkari found himself walking through New Geneva with President Hughes. The human leader had become something Zethkari was learning to call a friend, though the concept was still new to him. "I owe you an apology," Zethkari said as they walked past a fountain where children were playing. "When I first arrived, I believed your species was primitive and chaotic. I was wrong." President Hughes smiled. "You weren't entirely wrong. We are chaotic. We're inefficient, emotional, and sometimes completely irrational, but those aren't always weaknesses." "No," Zethkari agreed, "they are not." His final report to the Federation Council was unlike any diplomatic assessment he had ever written. Instead of focusing on military strength, technological capabilities, or economic potential, he wrote about human compassion, creativity, and determination. "Humanity represents something unique in the galaxy," he wrote. "They have achieved technological advancement without losing their capacity for empathy. They face challenges not with cold logic alone, but with hope, determination, and an unwavering belief in the value of every individual life. The Federation would benefit greatly from their membership, but more importantly, the galaxy would be improved by having humans as our partners." The response from the High Council came quickly. Earth was granted full Federation membership with all rights and responsibilities. But more importantly for Zethkari, there was a personal message attached. "Ambassador Zethkari," it read, "your reports on human society have been most illuminating. The Council has voted to make you the permanent liaison to Earth. Congratulations on your new assignment." On his last day as a visiting ambassador, Zethkari stood once again on Luna Station's observation deck. But this time, he was not alone. Dr. Carter, Dr. Brooks, General Martinez, Captain Morrison, and many other humans had gathered to celebrate his permanent appointment. "Will you miss your home planet?" Emma Collins asked. She had grown taller. during his stay, but she still asked the most important questions. I have learned something during my time here, Zethkari replied. Home is not just a place. It is where you are understood and valued for who you are. So Earth is your home now? She asked. Zethkari looked around at the humans who had become his friends. People who had shown him that logic and emotion could work together. People who had taught him that helping others was not a weakness, but a strength. Yes, he said. Earth is my home now. As he looked down at the blue and white planet below, Zethkari felt something he had never experienced before. Happiness, pure, illogical, wonderful happiness. The humans had given him something more valuable than all the diplomatic victories in his career. They had given him a family. 3 months later, when the Federation Council asked him to write a guide for other diplomats working with humans, Zethkari began with a simple,